session for any of these programs. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come. I'll be here this whole time. So afterwards, if you want to come talk about any of the programs, please come find me. And if you want any information, please grab a brochure from the website. Thank you.
Sri, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear y'all. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, I just wanted to test that out before we started. So I'm going to stand for a second, then I'm going to come back here. I'm going to come back here. So have you all been following COP27? You know what COP27 is? Who knows what COP27 is? Tell us what COP27 is, since you're the panelist.
That's fine. I have the highlight, but it's the climate change conference that's being held in Egypt, right?
Yes, where our president is, and there was a historic meeting between him and the Chinese leader. And so, you know, I raise this question because if you are paying any attention to the news and you know about the climate change issues that we're facing, and you know about the social unrest that's happening in Iran, and you know about the flooding and the violence that's happening in Africa and in Ethiopia in particular, if you know about all of these issues that are affecting people and planet, and your business students, one question really should come to your mind, and that is, what is the role of business? Like, what does business have to do with any of this? Do businesses have a responsibility to be part of solving some of these environmental challenges? Do businesses have a responsibility to think about their supply chain and where they're getting products from? Do businesses have an opportunity or a responsibility to influence public policies that change, that change our future? Right now, on the Chesapeake Bay, in the Chesapeake Bay area, there is serious coastal erosion, serious. And so we're working with some companies there. How are they going to help address that? And what is in it for them? What is the business case for dealing with the environment? And so we've got two amazing panelists here who are going to talk to us about some of these issues. And I'll sit down because it'll be awkward to stand and do this. As these panelists are speaking, please come up with a question that you would like to know. Could be something about classes or internships, could be something just sort of off the wall or network, anything that you want to ask. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay. So the first question that I was going to ask both of our guests is to tell us a little bit about how you got where you are in your career and where you are in your career. You want to go first? Yes.
So great. So I'm really excited to be here. My name is Janine Callahan. I am a proud graduate of one of the grad programs here in the School of Business. So highly encourage you to check those out. I have a technology management master's. So I always love these panels working with you because I'm an executive in a government contracting firm, right? And so, which is the business of Northern Virginia, this Washington metropolitan area. I've worked my whole career here. I went to school in this area. And, but that doesn't mean, even though we're focused on supporting the government, that we're not also concerned about broader issues. So I always love, I'm not the expert in some of the more, sustainability goals and some of these other key issues that some organizations are, that is their mission. But I really do believe that every business has an opportunity to make the world a little bit better in the areas where they operate. So I am an executive at a small software development company that supports the Department of Defense. I run an organization that delivers those services. It's about 70 engineers in my organization. I also am responsible for recruiting folks. So I have a small recruiting team that works in my organization. And then we are responsible, I'm also responsible for managing the staffing of those people on various assignments. So I have a placement team. So I have a small component of people that are focused on the, or large component of people that are focused on supporting government in various roles, and then a smaller component that's a corporate component. So it's sort of a mixed role. So that actually gives me some kind of interesting insights. And I've done both of those things myself in kind of coming up.
Okay, before we get to Sri,
Yeah.
did you always know you wanted to do this?
Oh, I never knew I wanted to do this.
Okay.
And that was actually one of the things I was hoping to kind of share with you is how important those bends in the road, those opportunistic things that happen and kind of how you can create more opportunities for synchronicity and for happy mishaps or, you know, happy encounters and building your network. Because I would say that while I've absolutely loved my career, I think I was talking to someone here, I had initially anticipated a career in the Foreign Service. That was my original goal, the Foreign Service School at Georgetown, and gosh, nowhere near there. But yeah, it was about the people that I knew and opportunities that came from that.
Yes, and you all, if you're 103 and 303 and you have those experiences, you're all talking about interviewing and mentoring and networking and a lot of those types of topics. And I think that's what you're getting at is take advantage of those mentors, take advantage of those networks.
Yes.
And those things that rise up that unexpectedly, and you're gonna want to say, that's not in my plan, check those out. Yeah. Sri.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I could not be there. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a George Mason School of Business alum, graduated in May. So it's always great to be back. And I apologize, I had a last minute travel itinerary that got changed, but I'm glad I could be here. My background super quickly is currently I am the Global Director of Sustainability at A.T. Kearney, which is a top management consulting firm. Like my co-panelists, my road has also had many curves in it, but it has led me to where I am right now, which I'm so excited about. I started off as an international human rights lawyer. I did policy work for the UN, did in-house counsel, and about 15 years ago, came across a space known as social entrepreneurship, which is now kind of everywhere. But at the time when I was looking into it, you couldn't get one Google hit at the time, helped build up the space of impact investing and social entrepreneurship. And we'll talk more about it, but it eventually led to my role right now, which is an ESG consultant. So going back to your initial question, which is, do companies have responsibility? My exact role is to advise companies on how to be more sustainable throughout their supply chain. And I think that we're at a time in our era where we do have to hold corporates and companies equally as accountable as everyone else into how we are working with the environment and the social impact we're having in the communities that we're serving. So look forward to more of the conversation.
Okay, well, so let me follow up with you then with a related question. And that is, so students here who have probably taken Business 100 have probably talked about corporate social responsibility. They've probably talked about environmental social governance, ESG. They've probably talked about responsible business, sustainability writ large. How would you, like, what term do you use and how do you define it?
So I use ESG, and ESG is very different than CSR. So I'll just go ahead and back up on that. CSR is really that corporate social responsibility, and that is what, as you as a corporation, are accountable for. And it's not necessarily within your supply chain, although that's a part of it. The difference is ESG is actually how you conduct business throughout your entire supply chain and value chain. With CSR, even from a perspective of who has ownership, it's outside of the regular day-to-day business operations. You might have ethical sourcing. You might want to make sure you're building schools in certain areas, but a large time the revenues come from the money comes from your philanthropic arm. Whereas with ESG, you're actually looking at your triple bottom line, which means you're looking at your revenue and your profits and how that's being affected throughout your entire supply chain. So I lean more towards what we call sustainability and social impact, which has now been engulfed in this whole idea of environmental, social, and governance.
Awesome. Okay, do y'all get that? That was a really good response. Does anyone out there have a question? Yeah. That is a great question. And just in case not everybody heard that, it's what are some things that companies are doing to be more sustainable, right? That's your question. What are some things that they're doing? Why don't we go to you with this first?
Oh, great. So I will say that I think we're great partners on this panel, honestly, because this, Sri, this is what you're doing and this what your focus is, right? And for me, our company mission and focus is not tackling these problems directly, right?
Which is okay.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But I think it's such a great question because just because it's not the point of our business doesn't mean we don't have responsibility for thinking about things in a way that make us more, that kind of put those goals on the table, right? And so, so we do primarily people. That's, we're like a consulting firm, right? So we don't really have, we're not building anything per se. So from so those kind of supply chain from a things perspective really aren't a factor for us. So we really look at the communities where our people come from. And I would say, I used to say where we operate, but we don't really have a corporate office anymore. One of those questions about how did COVID affect you? So we focus on our communities where our people come from. And then we work to go back into those communities and help with local initiatives. So one of the things we're doing now is working with an organization called Cherry Hill, which is up in the Baltimore area. And it's a historic area that initially was founded for Black GIs coming back from World War II. And it's an economically disadvantaged area, but we're helping invest there to help create interest in STEM careers and learning so that, really kind of building up that base and creating opportunity. So that's a different kind of sustainability, but it's more about the people, right, in the place.
But it's an important part of
Critical,
sustainability,
right?
it's absolutely critical, because many of you are going to be employed by companies or organizations or nonprofits or sky's the limit, really, or you might start your own company. And thinking about whether this sustainability or ESG is embedded into your DNA, so that it's part of your mission, or if it's a mission, but you've got a strong purpose that complements that. And that sounds like what you're saying, which is perfect. Sri.
Yes, and I think that's a great point to note is that it's not the company's mandate to do sustainability or social impact work. So it's not that we're going to find it in every company. It's just that now the way that the markets are pushing it, the way the policy is pushing it, companies are taking more responsibility and more accountability. And I always like to differentiate between a company that is there in it. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Well, I can hear you, but I think something popped up in the chat, which I can't read. So I would love to include those questions.
How can business? Do you want me to
going? Sorry. Yeah, you keep going.
So I think how companies are looking at the question was how are companies looking at it very different ways. Remember, there's an E, S, and G, and which is very different than just sustainability in conventional terms, which is just the environmental piece of it. I joined the firm that I joined because when we think about sustainability, we're thinking about all of it, the E, S, and the G. So it's really important to think about the social component as much as the E component, the environmental. So when we think about some of the things that companies are doing, I'm working right now on a project for waste and water. So what that means is a company is looking throughout their supply chain on how much water they're using, particularly in water scarce areas. You could look in developing nations, or you can look, in California, for example, that might have more droughts. So a company is going to look at how they're utilizing their water. For example, we think about water equity in communities. If you take a company like Coca-Cola, are they utilizing too much water as a beverage company in a community that is water scarce? So that's some of the things that companies look at throughout their supply chain is how are we using water? What's our carbon footprint? But then they also do look more at the diversity factor. Again, if you look at the supply chain, are we incorporating more diverse suppliers, women, veterans, people of color? And that's an important piece of this too. The difference, going back to the very first question about ESG versus CSR, with ESG, there is a metrics and a ratings that companies are now being held accountable to. I actually heard this morning from COP that, I don't know if you came across this, that now the government has to now have more ESG built into how they're going to be doing their supply chain. So that's going to be interesting to follow how government procurement is going to work as well.
Okay, so you opened the door, so now I need to follow.
that question. So I also do work with folks at Mason on ESG and thinking about the role of a business school in preparing you all to go out into this new world that's going to have you thinking about environment and social and governance. And so one of the things that I've come across, there are over 600 indices that are used to measure ESG, right? Over 600. It's not like there's one index out there. It's not like there's a B Corp and that's it, right? Like there's a lot of stuff out there. And so I guess, and sometimes that's hard to follow as a person. And so do you have any advice about, how these all work together? Because when we say that they're being held accountable, there's a lot of people who are writing in like the Wall Street Journal saying, this is all ridiculous, so take that where you would like to go.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a really long time, so 15 years, and I've definitely seen things in the market where I've been skeptical about, or are we having a knee-jerk reaction? I do think I know where the naysayers are, and I think one of the questions in the chat was about greenwashing and making sure that stakeholders their efforts are for real. I think that's where these indices are. These indicators are really some kind of framework for companies to work with so that they're not just greenwashing. They're not just planting trees to offset their carbon emissions, because the reality is we're not going to see any of that for 30 years. So I think these indices are very confusing. I know that we're gravitating more towards like GRI and SASB, not that any of you guys need to know that. But the point of this is, are you looking at the environmental and the social, as well as are you looking at your stakeholders? And that's why we have so many different indicators, is being able to make sure that we're combining. At the end of the day, you are a business that needs to make a profit. So are your investors happy? But then are your other stakeholders and shareholders happy as well, which is your consumers, your employees. So I think that, yes, there's a lot of indices out there. And I think that depending on which business market you're in, we pick one or two and we combine it. And that's really how we are holding companies accountable. So they're not just doing the greenwashing and doing the bare minimum. So I'm hopeful that that is where the market is going.
I hope you're right. I'm going to follow up with this because I do think there is some greenwashing that happens, right? I mean, there are people out there who are like, oh, this is the trend. This is an opportunity for me to act as though I'm doing this, but maybe not doing it, right? And so one of the questions is, how can businesses measure reassure skeptical stakeholders that their environmental efforts are for real and not just marketing? So in that environment where you've got some people who really are taking this seriously, how can we reassure them?
Well, I just want to, first thing I want to do is just differentiate slightly between organizations, companies that might be like, oh, I need to start doing something, right? Who may make small steps that if you step back, you kind of go, well, really, how impactful was that? But for them, for that company that may be addressing these issues for the first time, some of the things they may do, for those of you who've been in the arena for many years, you might go, well, that seems a little more like marketing or greenwashing or whatever. But I think legitimate baby steps, I think we need to champion those things, right?
Absolutely.
And so just that was
I think that's really important,
because when you're in it deeply, and you're looking for sizable, measurable impact. And I think that there are lots of firms like the company that I'm in where we're looking for ways, but it is adjacent somewhat to our mission, but we're trying to connect it to our business. But some of those things, those connections have to build out and become more robust, right, over time. Yeah. But initial small wins, it's like organizational change, right? You're looking for those small wins, right? Where you can kind of show a little bit of initial impact and get a ball rolling.
And that's really important too, I think, in this environment with COVID, as we're thinking about COVID, right? That companies were really hit hard, right? And so, I think it was around 200 companies signed this business roundtable statement saying, we care about these things. And then COVID hit. And
there are some businesses out there that had to make some really tough choices where they had to lay off people, which is not people, right? It's not taking care of your people. There are companies that had to make some strategic decisions about their supply chain and where they get their materials from, either because the supply chain it completely fell apart and they needed something right away, or because it was cheaper. And so I don't know if either of you want to comment on how your company survived COVID, and then just in general, what can we do, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses who I think face a tougher road ahead on ESG in some measures, in some sense.
My work did not get directly affected with COVID because I was an independent consultant and I worked with various businesses, but I can tell you what I noticed that COVID has done for ESG, which is truly to make, so COVID from my experience with companies has been within their environmental health and safety departments. And that has been their main thing to look at, their supply chain and then how it's affected their workers. But by doing that, it put a lot of pressure on the top to now look at your sustainability efforts. Where can you have more lean manufacturing? Where can you have more lean operations? That's what COVID had taught us, is how do we actually work with smaller units and not waste as much? And I think that eventually has a trickle down effect with the ESG component of all of this.
That's a great point.
I think that's a great point. On the services side, the people side of things, we had a huge challenge because so many of our employees, our engineers, work, in government spaces, right? In special facilities for that work. And those were all shut down for quite some time. Now, there were some great government programs that helped keep companies like mine afloat, right, in the interim. But then coming back from that, we really had to work very hard with our government customers and with the large companies that are the primes for the contracts that we're on, to really start to carve out the opportunity for some amount of telework. And that is a huge shift in the government space where my company provides services, because that was never an option pre-COVID. And I would say as of today, about 30% of the positions that, and we focus strictly on software engineers, right? Computer scientists, that's what we hire. But about 30% of our positions now have some component of telework. So not necessarily full time, but at least a couple days a week. And then our customer is working to increase that all the time. But that's causing them, in many ways, like you were saying, like going down to like really looking at basic processes. Sometimes with the government, there's a default, right? We've always done it this way. You work on our space, you work on our systems. It's just the way it is. And now they're really starting to pull that apart and be much more strategic about what truly needs to be done and can only be done here, and then what you have more latitude to do outside of those spaces, and differentiating the work, and then coming up with processes for moving them between those two spaces. And that, I think, is creating enormous opportunities for folks. And as I mentioned, we focus on technologists, but that's the case for anyone in the government arena. Even folks that may not be doing, strictly technical services. So
that's great. So I'm going to come to you in just 1 second. So you have a few minutes while I tell you this one thing to come up with a really great question. I think another online question came in, by the way. So if someone keeps those coming, that would be great. Because I love the questions, keep them coming. Because this is your thing. So what do you want to know is essentially what's happening. But I don't know if you've noticed that Mason is also making some strides in this area. We are reducing, we no longer have single-use plastic on campus, and we will only work with vendors on campus who agree that they too are not going to use single-use plastics. And what happened at an event that I was running, we had this catering service assure us they were one of our approved vendors. They will not be one of our approved vendors anymore because they showed up with plastic water bottles, and we're not doing that. So there are things that are happening right here on this university, conversations about, should we be using leaf blowers? And those big cars, right, with all the gas and they're running around and they're blowing leaves. When we know that the best thing for grass is to mulch the leaves into the grass. So there's some things that we're taking care of here that you should be aware of. Okay, so who has a question out there? Yes, we'll go to you and then you. Yes, I love this. Thank you.
Yeah, this question is related to greenwashing. It seems like every company now is claiming they're going to be carbon neutral by 2040 or 2050. And even, even oil companies, even JBS, who's one of the world leading producers of pork, beef, and chicken, also claim they're going to be carbon neutral by 2040. So these are very big claims. So what do you guys think? I believe that they are lying, over exaggerating, and taking the can down the road and not taking accountability for short-term responsibilities. So what do you think? Do you think they're just saying that, or do you think they're just saying that for PR?
That is
Or-
such a great question.
There's validity.
I have my own answer to this too, but you.
I'm good. I don't think I'm qualified actually to answer a question like that, but I think we got a perfect
Yeah.
person. You see.
Okay, so are y'all familiar where these targets came from when we say 2030 and 2050? So
I think you probably better talk about the
Okay, so-
the goals.
these are not arbitrary decades that people are choosing. The UN has come up with these UN SDGs. I think you guys have talked about this in other courses. That goal is it's $1 trillion budget to affect the world positively with these UN SDGs. They have put in a target of 2030, 2035, 2040, 2050. So companies need a metrics to follow. They have to figure out, what is my roadmap? Because remember, we're not in the business of trying to save the world if you're Coca-Cola. You're in the business of making a good beverage that is causing diabetes, but that's a different story. But the point is that these companies have set up these targets based on what the international community has set. So when they are saying 2040, it feels like it's going to be overnight that we're going to hit 2040 and it's not enough time. So I think, again, what these companies are trying to do, it's not necessarily greenwashing, because they know that consumers and the market is smarter now. You're a generation that is going to hold corporations accountable. And that is really important to know. They are listening to the consumers. I know that because I am having to do a lot of my assessments based on that. So I do think that these are very, they're not arbitrary targets in terms of the timeline, but they're very ambitious targets. And I think what we're finding is that a lot of companies are slowly getting there, but they may not hit their, for example, net zero goal by 2040. It might be 2050, but the point is that they've set a goal. And I think that as long as we can allow them to be pushed towards hitting that goal, then they're not going to fall into that trap of greenwashing, because again, people are a lot smarter. Accountants are a lot smarter. The finance department is a lot smarter. So they're not just going to do random marketing campaigns anymore. There is a genuine effort to try to hit these goals. And that's why people like me are in jobs right now.
Well, I think the fact that you have the job that you have is an indicator that companies are taking this seriously, right? I mean, that there are people who are focused on your question.
So I know we talked about what companies are doing, but how can individuals within companies?
Oh, that's great. So do you mean like an individual in a company that supports this, or an individual in a company whose company doesn't support this, or both? Both. Yes, you
I
can.
would love it.
Please
I was
do.
hoping that this question would come up, because if it wasn't, I was going to mention it anyway. So thank you. So kind of at the intersection of, these kind of, very worthy goals and ways that you want to personally have impact, and your own career growth trajectory and opportunity is exactly what you're asking, right? I think as an executive in a small company, right? My favorite thing is if someone raises their hand and says, I really want us to have an impact in this area, and I'm willing to help, right? Because having great ideas, but not necessarily being willing to sort of help out with that is, makes it so that they don't necessarily happen. But the great thing about that is all the different people that you'll meet, the opportunity to impact inside and outside, the leadership, the things you'll learn outside of your regular job. And I think that early career folks coming in, having a passion for something, finding a way to connect that to some aspect of the company, whether it's the actual service or product that they're delivering, the environment, the locale where they are focused, something connected to something with the business, because that will gives it legitimacy. And then being willing to help with that, I think those are the kinds of ways that you create those opportunities that help you build a really wonderful career. And I will just say for myself, volunteering for an internal committee in the company that it wasn't related to my job, it was completely different, but I had a very deep interest in organization development, how people and process and technology all come together. And that's a lifelong interest and passion of mine. And it was first formed actually in my schooling here, in my master's program. I got exposed to it and I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I volunteered in the company that I were in, and we were starting up actually, I think it was a diversity at the time, but it got bigger than that. I pivoted my whole career based on having, a year or 2 years of volunteer work. And it was huge for me. So I think having a great idea, finding a way to connect it, volunteering to help with it are great ways that individuals at any stage, but certainly early career, like the return on that investment can be absolutely huge.
Sri, what do you want to answer that too?
I agree. I think that most companies now, whether they're small, medium, or large, are looking at some way that they are affecting their inner community of people or the environment on some level. So I think no matter what size company you're with, there is opportunity. I know there are certain things like green teams. I know within my own firm, we have a sustainability team, we have a social impact team. At the end of the day, the employees are the most important stakeholder for a company. So your voice does matter. And I do think that there are not one company can do everything. So they do look to their employees to actually help facilitate places. So even if there isn't a robust program in place, I do think that you have a voice, whether it's looking at your cafeteria and saying, okay, we need to have composting. That's what I did in my firm. I went into my kitchen pantry. I was like, well, are we composting? And the office manager was like, well, we used to compost, but maybe we can find someone. And we found a veteran-owned company right there on the spot that now is going to come collect food waste. So I think there's just certain ways that you can insert yourself. And I would highly recommend doing that because a company can't do everything on their own.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I like the emphasis on volunteering and doing it yourself. I'm sure those of you online and those of you in this room, some of you have had Professor Ann Lauer as an instructor, and she had an idea. She said, why are we using paper? Why are we not using recyclable paper? How come we are buying this paper and it's not recyclable? And so she took it upon herself to do all of the research, to conduct with industries, like I think it was a tree zero waste or something like that company, found out the pricing, figured out what it would cost, and now we use recyclable paper, right? Because she had an idea. And that's an educational institution. And well, there are those that would claim that it's a business. I don't think it's a business, but it does operate sometimes like a business. But yes, but I think of you as students and learners and not consumers as much. So what other questions do you have? I have a question. Yes.
The question was, how have businesses changed the way in which they impact public and international policy?
Great. Did you hear that, Sri?
Could you repeat? I heard the first half.
How have businesses changed the way in which they impact public and international policies with COVID or market fluctuations?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you want me to go for this one first? Okay. I think more than companies, it's the market. I think the market influences the company. And this is great for DC because being in the DC area, we know how lobbying works, right? Where you have the companies and the lobbying firms and government policy. I do think that companies can influence policy. But I think more so policy influences companies, and it's really the market, the consumers that influence policy from my perspective. I think more than influencing, they have to adhere to international policy and adhere to certain regulatory frameworks. That's the piece that to me comes out more than whether they're doing the influencing. So if you're a company in the US, but you have operations in Brazil, for example, you really are going to have to think about how if Brazil has signed the Kyoto protocols and the US has not. So I think taking in policy is going to be important, but I don't know necessarily how much they influence it from my perspective.
Interesting. Okay, well, you're in a company. Well, I am, and I would say that I think the part of the I would go back to the example that I mentioned about kind of this demand for telework, and this is sort of even more local from a policy perspective. But you know, I think companies like mine have been instrumental in helping government agencies understand the critical nature of looking at their own policies and procedures and the corresponding facilities and networks and technologies and all of that to ensure that, you know, where telework can be made available, it is, because, you know, if you can't keep the people, right, if people are going to be leaving to go work for companies where they can work 100% remote, you know, it doesn't, you know, sometimes the mission is compelling to people, other times it's not. And so that focus on what are the policies, can they be changed, how can they be adjusted, and then how can we help take advantage of that to provide opportunities for our own folks, I think is kind of a very sort of micro version of what Drew's talking about. And that is definitely a market-driven thing, right?
Yes.
Like we need to retain our people and they have lots of other options. So if we don't make those, you know, attractive options available to them through government, you know, in serving the government, they're going to go somewhere else.
Exactly. Okay, I'm going to pivot over to a question from online, which is, when you say supply chain, I automatically think manufacturing. What are some opportunities to work between the scientific companies with the newest tech for pollution solutions, and the manufacturers, and working in cost for the changes, understanding the impact of the cost in the long run, and how successful is that sell to stakeholders for you as working at a company or for stakeholders in general, or that sell?
Well, you sound like a consultant, so you sound like you need to take over my job, because that's exactly what we're trying to figure out. I think, no, great point about supply chain and manufacturing. There's a lot more to supply chain other than manufacturing, obviously, but in terms of GHG emissions, yes, a lot of it is through the manufacturing, although I've learned in this project, there's a lot more to it. For example, if you have waste and you put waste in a landfill, that landfill actually is emitting a lot more carbon emissions than even the manufacturing of it. So I think there's a lot more to it. I'm working right now within the scientific community to do that. What we're trying to do with work with technology companies and innovators, you know, we have design thinking labs, is how can you come up with better technology that measures your water usage or that measures your electricity as a manufacturing unit. So I think that's exactly what we're doing right now, is working with innovators and how we can blend what we're doing with waste, water, greenhouse emissions with the new technology that's out there. One area that I work in is called circularity. Have y'all heard of that? Have you come across this? This whole concept of when you have end of life of a product, what happens to that product? Can we reuse it? Can we recycle it? So for example, if we have, let's say my cell phone, when it's coming to the end of its life, what's going to happen to all of these parts that are in there? Can I use those parts to now be utilized in a manufacturing unit or put into something else? So that's something that we also look at throughout the supply chain, is the end of life usage. That is where technology can come in. That's where we can put in like barometers of technology. Is it the end of a life 3 years from now or 2 years from now? So you, as someone who owns the product, will know what to do with that product. Do you send it back to the manufacturer so we can properly dispose of it? Can we refurbish it? So there's a lot of different aspects to this that come into play when we think about technology and the missions. It's not as black and white, but I do think there's different things that we can, again, be innovative about. And that's what we're doing right now. Sorry, and you asked about the cost piece of it, and that is exactly the point. There is a cost right now, and then after 2 or 3 years, the cost will level out. And that's the whole point of ESG, is you might have a high cost right now, but eventually it becomes more sustainable as a business operation. So that was your other part of your question I wanted to answer.
Which is why it's hard sometimes for small startup companies to do that, right? Because the opportunity cost is great. And they don't have the wiggle room necessarily to hang on for the marathon because they feel like they're running a sprint. That's a good point.
Yeah, what I would also say is that's typical of any kind of
Yeah.
shift or change, right? You have to make an investment. There's going to be inefficiencies as you move. I spent a big part of my career doing process engineering, right? And thinking about how to do things more efficiently and effectively. But inevitably, the first part of that is you're telling people you're going to change how they're doing their job. And anytime you ask someone to change what they're doing and how they're doing it, you're going to be highly inefficient for a while that settles in. And so I think that approach is, I mean, having that same understanding, right? Regardless of the focus of the change, is that there always is that, that jump in the curve, right? Before things settle down, and you're really, focused on how do you collapse that, and then how do you get to that new state as soon as possible with as many of the people coming along, because that's the other thing, right? You can get there faster, but you got to, oftentimes you have to kind of lose some people along the way. If your goal is to get as many people with you in that new state, that takes a little bit more time because people need time to adjust. So
Those of you, have any of you taken Business 200 yet? Okay, so Cradle to Grave, right? You still read that?
I just finished.
You just finished it. That is all about the circular economy. So that ought to be ringing quite true. So when you take Business 200, you will know something about the circular economy already. Any other questions from the group here? You're asking very good questions. Yes.
For small companies who face this.
Wait, I'm so sorry. Can you just speak up just a smidge? I can't, go ahead, try again.
For small companies who face this as to how to get responsible aspects, are there certain references that you use? Particularly?
Okay, so first, I'm gonna miss this. For smaller companies, is there some sort of reference that they can use? Right,
Right.
to engage in
Guide their
sustainability, to guide their sustainability goals.
I would still look at how ESG does their frameworks. Because these are indicators that are across the board and it's easy. And also sometimes small companies, do they have an exit plan? Do they want to exit at some point? Do they want to be acquired? Do they want to grow? If that's the case, they're eventually going to have to factor in the bigger ESG frameworks. So I would start there. They don't have to do everything, but maybe bring out components of it that fit into their business.
I would say, I think that's an awesome place to start. And then as you're looking through those things, I would hone in on particular areas that are connected to the business, right? And because if you can find that sweet spot, then you're, in some ways, and I'm going to say business case, I don't mean the big business case, but your ability to make the case for why the company should put some effort towards this, right? Is strengthened. If you can find a component connected to the goal of the business.
That's great. I don't know if any of you are wondering this, but I'm sort of wondering what kinds of experiences or knowledge or internships or degrees or, how can students prepare themselves for this changing world that's going from the Milton Friedman, profit is king to this idea of stakeholder capitalism when we're thinking about people, planet, employers, as well as shareholders. So how could they prepare themselves for this new world? What do they need to know or do?
Good question.
So for me, I come from a traditional social entrepreneurship impact business background. And even though I work in ESG and work for a corporate with corporates, I would highly recommend learning through startups or social entrepreneurships if you're really interested in doing business that is changing the world for good. I think they have very innovative models to work with. They also are creating an impact that's more tangible probably early on in your career to feel. So if there's a way to align yourself with organizations that are doing that, and they don't have to be, I'm not talking about traditional nonprofits. These are businesses that have that revenue model. I would say look into that. Speaking to as many people as possible early on in your career is so important. I know you've heard this before, but for me, I've just taken a chance. And I would say just take a chance. If something resonates in your heart, in your being, then go for it, because you don't know where it's going to lead. So I would definitely say, try to find those organizations around the DMV area for the summer, try to find mentors that you can work with to learn more about what their businesses are doing, and then start off there. And then I'm a big fan of consulting. So of course, look into the consulting firms, because they are the ones that really do have a pulse on what's happening with corporations when it comes to the ESG piece of it.
So I'm gonna, advocate for, the government contracting arena, right? And I would say that, sometimes it's the larger companies that have the really well-resourced internship programs. But the large government contractors, whether we're talking about like a Lockheed Martin or Deloitte, any of those, they're gonna have, internal groups that are, working on some of these issues. And I think you could differentiate yourself from an internship perspective if you also talked about, and I'd also like to be involved, like with some of these other, I'd like to learn more about your employee resource groups, or other areas where the employees within the company are impacting, and expressing some interest in being involved with that as an intern. I think that could be pretty powerful as well. So I think that even if you're looking for an internship in your main area of concentration with a company that may not necessarily have these, specific goals, you still can find ways to connect to that and get get some of that experience, and then decide, right? Is this something that is so meaningful to me that I want to pursue it as my primary career goal, or is it something that I just know that I want to be involved with no matter where I am?
Great. Other questions, online or in person?
Sorry if I missed this, but I was curious. So if students are looking for like internships, like we're talking about, maybe even if it's with a traditional company, but that has some nice initiatives going on, is there some main magical website, rather than going to each company's page and saying, do they have anything going on? Do they have anything going on? That's maybe this route. Is there some kind of really quick site tool or some place to go to say, here's all the companies that are doing great things? So you can reach out to these people on LinkedIn to see, maybe there's some opportunities there.
So I would say a great place to start is Glassdoor, right? Do just some regular searching. So I mentioned, one of the things I'm really interested in is kind of culture, but not kind of what goes up on our core values on our website type culture, but how is the employee's experience of being in the company as a demonstration of the culture of the company, right? And so there's a really interesting study that was done by MIT Sloan School of Management on kind of correlating Glassdoor comments with culture scores. And really drilling down on the words that employees use that correlate with high or low culture scores, right? And so it's really fascinating, actually. But I think that that's a great place to look. Use the kind of keywords we've been talking about here: sustainability, employee research groups. Try to find companies where those things are in the comments, and then you sort of do that sort of link analysis backwards from those comments. That would be a suggestion I would have.
Anything from you, Sri?
Yeah, I know that there's Idealist. They probably will be doing something, idealist.org. I know that there is, I don't know if it's it might be the Aspen Institute, or one of them has a job board. So I would look up Impact Businesses job board. I want to say it's hosted by, it's hosted by SoCap Hub, I think.
Yeah, which is SCAP.
Right. Okay. And then LinkedIn, nowadays I'm seeing people on LinkedIn post jobs from within their networks, like at Coca-Cola or at L'Oreal or something. So I would just definitely join a LinkedIn ESG sustainability group, because some of the people who start those are also posting jobs.
And can I just add to that, you have your fantastic career services here in the lower level of Enterprise Hall, and before you graduate, you really should go talk to them, because they can help you on Handshake, find a job that works for you that's in this space. So I would totally take advantage of what our career services have to offer, and the wonderful people who greeted you when you came in today, Carrie Willigan, I see Caleb Lewis out there. Talk to them. I mean, they love it. That's their job. That's why they have their job. Carrie just spoke to one of my classes. She loves talking to students. So use that as a resource. The last question, does anybody have a burning question that they want to ask? I don't have this. I kind of want to know, what do you wish that you had known when you were sitting in the chairs that these students are sitting in, or wherever they are online? What do you wish that you would have known that has helped you now? You know, we have to think about that.
So I would say that the thing that I wish I had embraced earlier
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
was the opportunities at the bends in the road, right? As opposed to thinking, oh, this isn't what I planned, or this isn't what I wanted, or this didn't go well. Like, really, I think it probably wasn't really until my early 30s that I realized, wow, and looked back a bit, that I was like, wow, like those were great opportunities. Everything worked out fine. And I definitely didn't end up where I thought I was going to be, but it's been great all along the way. And I think that's the thing I would embrace as soon as you can, right? Like, the bends in the road are the opportunities.
That's great. That's great advice. Yes. And everybody knows what she means by bends in the road. Yep. Okay, good. 3.
Very similar response to me is embracing the unknowns earlier. You know, I was one of those people that I will ask questions. I'm a networker. So if there's any advice that I could give, is use this time, utilize this time, especially with the resources you have, to network and to get access to places that you may not normally have access to. So I wish I probably did a lot more of that, because it's a lot harder when you're out of college, out of university. But also just embracing the fact that I think I'm going in one direction, and then life gave me another opportunity, and just not hesitating, because that is the opportunity that led me to where I am right now. So be okay with the unknowns, and be okay to take a chance with those, and not to have any regrets with it.
Oh, those are wonderful pieces of advice. And we coincidentally in Business 303, Advanced Professional Skills, you will have the opportunity to go out and interview someone. And I would encourage you not to view it as, oh my gosh, I got to complete this college assignment. I got to go talk to somebody. I can't tell you how many students get jobs out of those interviews, and I'm serious, or internships out of those interviews. Go out, take this advice, try out new things, take advantage of, oh gosh, I thought I really loved human resources, and then I talked to this human resources person, and I'm like, I don't really know if that's my thing, right? Take advantage of that. And I think that's what our panelists are suggesting, is to just really take advantage of those opportunities. And sometimes assignments are opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I did the information review 303, and I actually have an internship with the company.
Thank you for sharing that. That is like, and I did not plan him there to say that. No, but that has happened so many times. So take advantage of those opportunities. And now I want to say thank you to Sri, thank you to Janine for coming and taking their time to talk to us. Do you have time to hang around?
I do.
Okay, perfect. If you're here, ask questions. There is food over there. We have it for you. There's no shame in taking a plate of brownies or cookies with you out the door. In fact, I would encourage you to do it, because otherwise they come back to our office, and then we do not need to be eating that. We are not growing the way that you are growing these days. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Sri. Okay, cool. All right.
Very good.